For the audience, we are going to show a short video to introduce our final session for today. Thank you.
For decades, we've been losing far too many young people in science, technology, engineering and maths. Many were put off because of stereotypes and bias. Others were lost through a lack of career support. So the reasons we lose people are complex, but the result is the same: a loss for Australia's culture, economy and future. There is good news though. We are making strides in gender equity in STEM, and our team's playing a key role in supporting these efforts. We're working really hard to equip you with the tools and insights necessary to navigate this terrain with confidence. Today we confront the fundamental question: how do we make the case for change and measure our progress effectively?
Australia has hundreds of programs aimed at boosting participation in STEM. But do these programs actually work? That's where evaluation comes in. In 2020, I created the National Evaluation Guide for STEM Equity Programs. The intention behind the guide was to break evaluation down into a simple, step-by-step approach that's easy for everyone to apply. Building on this, the Australian government provided additional funding to create the STEM Equity Evaluation Portal, an online, user-friendly tool to create evaluations and store them in a repository for others to learn from. Together, these tools are game changers, helping to embed a culture of evaluation and data-driven accountability in Australia's STEM sector. Evaluation is the keystone to positive change in STEM. We must understand what works and what doesn't to effectively progress in an agile way. This means diving deep into the data, honestly reflecting on our findings, and sharing them openly.
In 2019, the government, academia, industry and the community came together for the first time and created a framework to push for gender equity in STEM by 2030. The Women in STEM Decadal Plan is a shared vision we're all working towards, and evaluation is essential to this plan. An evidence-informed approach is crucial for real, lasting change, and the stakes are high. We need to tap into all of the talent Australia has to offer. The demand for a STEM-skilled workforce is skyrocketing, but systemic barriers still exist across all STEM fields, threatening Australia's future.
The portal meets 3 key strategic recommendations from the Women in STEM Decadal Plan under opportunity number 2, evaluation, understanding what works. By 2022, establish a consistent national evaluation framework that guides evaluation efforts across all existing and future gender equity initiatives. Tick. Organizations who fund STEM gender equity initiatives support evaluation and evidence-based approaches by requiring evaluation as a condition of funding. Tick. Improve awareness of existing programs and their efficacy. Tick. Currently, the portal has over 140 users from various organizations across Australia and overseas. Organizations like the Champions of Change Coalition, Astro 3D, and the Bionics Institute are leveraging the portal to evaluate their equity programs effectively.
According to recent data from the Australian Government's STEM Equity Monitor, only 1 in 10 women with a STEM qualification work in a STEM qualified industry 5 years after graduation. This statistic points to 2 key issues: retention and progression. Many organisations tackle retention and progression by implementing gender equity programs. There is growing evidence that the way programs are implemented can impact their success.
In March 2023, we launched Workplace Gender Equity, an implementation guide. This guide, authored by Susan Barnes and me, provides practical advice on how to develop evidence-based programs that address gender inequity and how to implement these programs effectively. The guide completes a comprehensive set of evidence-based resources designed to help workplaces advance their diversity and inclusion efforts. The evaluation portal and implementation guide empower organizations to develop and implement gender equity programs more effectively. They streamline the evaluation process, ensure thorough and accurate assessments of workplace initiatives.
Embedding a culture of evaluation and sharing results can help us collectively improve equity in STEM. It's time to start measuring our impacts to effectively drive meaningful change.
Thank you so much. Now we're on to our final session. Session 3, Informed Decision Making, Measuring Success and Creating Change in Workplace Inclusion. I'm very delighted and excited to introduce our final panelists for today. Australia has hundreds of STEM equity programs that seek to address inequalities in STEM, but are they working? By evaluating programs, we can understand if our actions are effective to create positive change. And on the discussion of that, our panel discussion, I would like to introduce our wonderful panelists for this discussion, Dr. Isabelle Kingsley and Dr. Bree Gorman. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm just going to jump straight into the questions. Bree, you work with a range of organisations in the public and private sector. What strategies do you have that you found effective in leveraging the business case for equity, diversity and inclusion to gain buy-in from leaders to drive change? Easy one for you.
It's a great one to start, and I don't think I'm going to be very diplomatic with my answer. I actually hate the business case for diversity. Not only does it make me cringe, but it doesn't help engage our leaders anyway in the way that we want them to show up in this type of work. So what do I mean by that? The business case is a fact. Yes, if we have diverse, equitable and inclusive workplaces, we will absolutely create better business outcomes. We know that for a fact. But if we engage our leaders into this work by using that business case, we don't actually achieve diverse, equitable and inclusive workplaces because the leaders aren't coming at it from the right perspective. So they're not leading at it from a people perspective, which is what we need. We can't create inclusive environments if our leaders aren't genuinely and authentically showing up for the work. So if they think I'm doing this because I'm going to get better profit margins, you can't get the diverse, equitable, inclusive workplaces. So you can't actually achieve the business case outcomes, even if you wanted to. So I haven't answered your question, but that's kind of a constant conversation that I will have with people who ask me, how do I get my leaders to get involved with this? So to say what's perhaps a better approach is to get them relationally involved in their people. And knowing that yes, it can help to know that this will also be good for business, but that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because we are people and we are working with people. And we want those people to have healthy, fulfilling work lives and home lives. And so it is our responsibility as leaders to create that, let alone the profit.
The whole, what's my return on investment for doing this? And that's all they consider. But you're right, we are all humans and we all deserve to feel safe, welcome and belong and feel that we belong. To be afraid of, sharing something that is apparently quote unquote taboo or unsupported because of potential behaviours in the workplace that people might not even realise, like inadvertent ways in which people are not being inclusive and supportive, and then not having those policies or practices to back that up, and then potentially only doing it when it becomes relevant, and then all eyes are on the person that's made it relevant, and so it's very reactive rather than proactive. And the question is always asked. I'm like, oh, I want to do all this stuff, but the CEO can't get involved. And I want to do all of this, but my senior management team isn't. But I really, really enjoyed when you said, like, we're all people. We all want to feel valued, respected, and treated with dignity, regardless of sexuality, gender, disability, so on and so forth. It's just kind of really hard, especially in the business case of, like, what am I going to get from this, and what are the benefits for the organization, for me as a business owner or an organization. So not an easy question to have just thrown at you, but it's often a question that everyone wants to know, because they want to see change within their workplace, but they can't get that buy-in. Yeah. And if they can't get that buy-in, it almost fails before it starts. And how do you overcome that?
Yeah, so I think we have to kind of change that conversation with our leaders to say, you know, what we want to do is actually empower our leaders to feel like they want to create this change, because it's going to be a better workplace for them too. And yes, it's going to have the business outcomes. But rather than going to our leaders and they come to us and say, oh, well, what's going to be the return on investment? No, hang on, we're talking about people here and people's lives. Let's empower and engage them in a way that means that they do genuinely engage with the topic. And the majority of leaders, we can get them to genuinely engage. We just have to be strategic about it. Yeah. And we have to be willing to hold space for the conversations and for the biases and assumptions that they bring to that conversation as well.
Meeting people where they're at in their journey of understanding something. Yeah. I often say, like, you don't know what you don't know as a disabled person. Like, you don't know what it's like to be a wheelchair user and not have ramps or can't get into buildings or so on and so forth. But when you can share that's a big barrier to the workplace and humanize it and make that connection, then you're not seen as a statistic or something or an inconvenience or a difficulty, but someone that actually wants to contribute, that has potential, that is competent, that just needs adjustments to make it a level playing field. So thank you for that. And sorry, another question which you may not like. How do you find your clients generally when they want a quick fix? And are they willing to take the time to critically evaluate that, or just, you know, do something to quick tick a box? And what do you do in that situation? And please, Isabelle, if you want to chime in, please do.
As you were answering, I was thinking, what about the leaders who just want to tick the box, because that's a common motivation. So I'm interested.
Yeah. Now I feel like all the pressure. I would probably have 5 organisations a week come to me looking for a quick fix, and it might be in the form of a 1-hour lunch and learn, or it might be in the form of, yes, we're ready to create an action plan. So can you just create the plan? And I say, sure, have we done the research? Do we understand what people are feeling and thinking? And do you know who's in your organisation? No, we're sick of talking. We just want to jump to action. When I hear an organisation tell me that, unless they can back it up with the research to show they've done it, I then use my persuasion and negotiation skills to say, actually, no, we need to, the whole point of the process is the engagement. Yeah. You know, we can't create, as I said, we can't create inclusive environments unless we do the engagement piece. And sometimes that's even more important than the action that we come out with at the end. That people feel that they're heard, that they're valued, they're being listened to, and that somebody's doing something with that information. And so what do I do when they come for quick fixes? I either charge a ridiculously high amount so that I can use that money to then make things better in another workplace perhaps, or I try to encourage them to think a bit differently about how we do it, and it doesn't have to be expensive. You know, there are ways that we can do meaningful, sustainable change without people having to pay me a heap of money. That will be way more effective than a 1-hour lunch and learn.
Yeah, no box ticking. Did you want to add to the whole situation of, like, the box ticking and not doing it for the right reasons, I guess?
I mean, it's always really important to dig to find out what the true underlying motivation is. And unfortunately, research even shows that it is a lot of box ticking or, like external pressures to conform to, for example, policies or anything like that. So overcoming that is the really hard part, which is why I was curious to ask the same question.
Yeah, absolutely. Box ticking is not fun. Tokenism and all of that is not. But I think when you're not a part of a minority group, you don't understand that. You just, you want to tick that box. You want to, say you're an equal opportunity employer. You want to, and then you employ someone, a part of the equal opportunity employment, and then go, oh, well, we don't know how to accommodate to this person. We don't know how to support them and encourage them to actually work to their fullest potential, which is that whole reactiveness. And then they go to Bree and go, help me fix it, make it, which is really challenging because it doesn't have that sincerity. And then the onus is almost on that person to then be the educator of everything, like the go-to person to be like, oh, you're disabled. Now I'm going to, any sort of disabled question, I'm just going to go to Aki and ask them all the questions. That almost onus to educate, even though like that's not my job. My job is to do the job that I've been hired to do. But there's that happens a lot in a workplace, and it is and can be quite challenging because we all want to be respected and valued in workplaces or within community and within society.
And just to like carry on from that a little bit, the tick boxing that you see happens, and as you were talking, it just came to mind. I worked with an organisation that said, oh yeah, we've just rolled out pronouns.
Rolled them out? Like
what do you mean by that? Well, we've rolled them out. Okay. And what they had done is put them on the bottom of everybody's signature.
Yeah.
And so they ticked the box, and I said, have you had any conversations with your people about what that means? And they said, no, actually, we've had a few people complain and be really angry about it. Well, of course you have, because you haven't actually done the work. Whereas if we do take that approach first, where we listen and we ask people of the LGBTIQA plus community within the organisation, how could we do better? How would this look differently for you to feel more inclusive? Then sure, you can also tick the boxes at the same time, but you're doing that meaningful work, and it can sometimes be a lot easier than what you thought it was. As you're describing, like those assumptions that are made as to what the problem is are sometimes so far removed from what it actually is in that organisation.
Yeah. Very, very far removed. The next question is for you, Isabelle. You developed the STEM Equity Evaluation Portal. How important is it for organisations to adopt data-driven approaches in assessing their programs and engaging stakeholders effectively?
Extremely important. Like you were just saying, if you don't really know what the problem is, or you don't ask, or you don't do the research, or you don't look at the data, then how do you know what you should be doing to improve or fix the problem? So I guess I see evaluation and the portal as a GPS. Imagine if you're in a city, a foreign city, you don't speak the language, and you don't have your GPS. You don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going. You don't know which direction to go in first. Should I go this way? You're going to end up going around in circles for a while. So it's exactly the same with any kind of equity effort. You need to know where you're starting, and to know that, you need to look at the data. You have to talk to your people. You have to dig. And you have to collect as much information as you can to then go, okay, now we know where the issues are, where the pinch points are, where the barriers are, and we've talked to our people and we know them and understand them better. Now we know what we need to do next. So it gives you direction. So the evaluation portal does just that, because it prompts you to ask all the right questions and guides you down. So what is the problem? What do you know about it? What should you do about it? What data should you collect to find out if you're actually pointing in the right direction? And then kind of continue to look at those data to either continue in the right direction or tweak. So that's what the portal does.
On the note of the portal, have people embraced it? or had resistance to it, and what feedback have you received?
Actually, people have embraced it.
Amazing.
Which is great. I mean, the reason why we built the portal, as we saw in the video, is it was requested. It was a recommendation from the Women in STEM Decadal Plan. And so people just wanted this. They wanted something where they could go, okay, what works? Mm-hmm. I want to know what works. Where do we go to know what works? Here's where you go. So we built it. And people have come. We've got over 140 users, which, in 2018 or so, there was some research done where we looked at how many STEM equity initiatives were in Australia, and there were about 300. So, half of the initiatives out there are using the portal, and they're using it to create really meaningful, rigorous evaluations. But then you go on there and you can see all these evaluations of what people have done, what worked, and most importantly, what didn't, so that everybody else doesn't make the same mistakes.
That is very insightful in relation to especially what doesn't work and how you can improve and what you can do better, and the embracing. That's great. You always want people to embrace the work you've done, right? Where do you see it in 10 years' time?
In 10 years' time, I hope that the portal can really help embed that culture of data-driven decision-making. So I see the portal as being the default tool for anyone trying to shift the dial on equity, diversity, and inclusion. I want it to be the place to go, because the only way the portal will be a really useful tool is if people use it. So that's what I hope.
You want everybody to have a good GPS system that takes them to the right place.
Correct.
That is what we want.
And I think that coming back to the what doesn't work.
Yeah.
There is stigma. We live in a competitive world, right? So people are always a little bit reluctant to say, we did this, we invested a lot of money, time, and effort into it, and it didn't work, or it had unintended consequences. And people want to hide that because we're embarrassed or our competitors did it differently. But I think that is one of the most valuable things that we can get from the portal, is not just what works really well, but also don't go down this path because this doesn't work. I've tried it. Yeah.
Learn from the learnings and the data and everything.
Yes.
And have a fully data-driven GPS that takes you the right way in the correct direction to achieve what we want to achieve.
Yeah.
So to both of you, in measuring success, you need to ask the right questions to get the right data to inform change. How important is the process of co-design? Go with you, Bree, first.
Sure. It's incredibly important, but I think it's also very dependent upon, when we're talking about organisational change, dependent on the level of trust that employees have of leadership. So we know that, and this is not my knowledge, this is Lily Zeng, who's an incredible DEI practitioner in the US, but Lily identified that if you're working in an organisation where employees have a high level of trust with management and leadership, we can actually get away with doing a little less co-design because the employees trust that the leaders are genuinely engaged in their well-being. And so we still need co-design, but we perhaps don't have to go to the same level we would if we're working with an organisation where the employees do not trust leadership at all. That's where it needs to be grassroots driven. So we have to make sure that it is almost led as much as possible by the employees, not in a way where it's them expending their emotional labour and their physical labour for the benefit of the organisation, in an unpaid way, but in a way that does give them ownership and power and allows them to feel seen and heard, and that the leaders are generally engaging with the process. So it's absolutely dependent on where the organisation is at. But, you know, as we've been discussing, the only way we start this work is by listening to the people. And either that can be through a variety of ways. It can be through surveys and things that are less co-design and more just information grabbing. But once we've got that information, I wholly believe that the action should be developed in a co-design way. And that should be in not just somebody like me, an external consultant working with the employees to come up with actions, because that doesn't work. But it's perhaps somebody like me facilitating a session of leaders, of employees, of your HR folks, of your communications team, of your facilities manager, getting them all together in a space where you can present the data that you've found, and then they can design the actions from there in a way that's context specific. If I come up with an action for an organisation that I don't work in, it's not necessarily, it might be a great action, doesn't mean it's going to work in that place. But your people know what will work and what won't work. And obviously we need to challenge them if they're sitting in the box a bit and not being innovative enough. But in the right environment, they absolutely can come up with the actions that are needed to drive it forward. And that then gets the engagement piece. It means that there is more likelihood of success of those actions, and that they will monitor and evaluate that as it goes on because they feel like they own it.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, ownership and agency over the process is so important, because you're developing these actions for your people, for them, so it needs to work for them. And the only ones who can say what's actually going to work is those people. So are those people. So it's absolutely essential, and it just ensures that whatever you come up with is going to be sensitive, it's going to be contextual, and is going to be the right fit. And yes, then obviously you're going to have better success, or more likely to be successful.
Can I share an example?
Yeah, absolutely.
I worked with it was in a university sector a fair while ago now, but there was a leader who was really committed. He'd recognised that his leadership were all men, and his early career, mid-career researchers were almost exclusively women. And he invested in a program, a career development program, of course, for these women to build their leadership skills. And he invested a significant amount of money, and 2 or 3 years. And then he came to me and he said, I've done all this work and no one will apply for the promotion. I said, okay, have you asked them why? And of course he said no. So he'd created this action to solve a problem without even asking the people. And the reality was those researchers did not want the promotion because they saw that those working at the higher level were working ridiculous hours, all the rest of the barriers that we know exist in leadership. So he said to them, well, what would make you apply for promotion? And they said, I'll have half a day of an admin assistant. Because I can see that it's this huge admin load once I go up to that level. I can't manage that. Give me an admin assistant for half a day a week. This was much cheaper than the career development program that he'd invested in. So,
Communicate.
Exactly.
Yes.
Ask people what the barriers are and
Don't-
what the enablers might be, and I can tell you.
And don't make assumptions.
Yeah, it won't be generic.
And chuck so much money into something that people actually don't want, don't need, because they haven't been asked what actually matters most to them. Could save a lot of money and time and energy and effort and maybe some heartbreak. I don't know, but that just seems like, that's the whole, I guess, the co-designing component, or at least if you're supporting someone, ask them what their needs are, ask them how they can best be supported to fulfill whatever potential, whatever role that they want to, without making those assumptions and putting all these things in place that may not even remotely be part of what they need or want.
And also I think coming back to the asking the right questions part of your question, that applies to also when you're assessing the impact or the outcome of whatever action plan you've put together. And I think that often I mean, in my experience, you often see people asking the wrong questions and then not getting the information that they want. So, for example, if you're, thinking about women in leadership, for example, and promotions, if you create a program to get, to get women to apply for promotions, and you want to know how that impacted their ability to apply, for example, asking them if they thought the program was good is not actually the right question.
Yeah.
You're not getting what benefits did you get out of it? What didn't work for you? Those are the right questions, but did you think it was good is not going to get you the information that you need to be able to say this was successful or not, this had an impact on my employees or not. So even just assessing success, you need to ask the right questions that relate to what you're trying to measure.
Evaluate that appropriately, not have vague questions that don't give you any room for improvement and understanding of what your staff or community want.
Yeah.
Seems quite simple, but sometimes it isn't that viewed that way or recognized that way. So it's a very nice reminder to just communicate, ask the right questions. Sometimes the questions can be simple and don't have to be ridiculously complex. Isabelle, what effective approaches for measuring effectiveness of diversity and inclusion initiatives have you had, and how do organizations measure these metrics to evaluate in relation to organizational outcomes?
Yeah. I mean, both the evaluation guide and the evaluation portal have those approaches embedded. I designed them with those approaches embedded. Partially, well, I'd say the number one thing that those tools do really well is they link up objectives with indicators. Translation, they link up what is your goal and what information do you need to look at to know that you're meeting your goal. So asking the right questions and looking at the right data. And that is, so when I started creating those tools, I went and asked people, what do you struggle with? What do you need?
Yeah.
I am building a tool for you.
Yeah.
What do you need? And that was what they were like, we never really know what we're supposed to be measuring, and we don't know where to start. Well, what's your end goal? And then how do you measure? How do you measure that? So that's one really important approach. And then I think another really important approach is collecting both quantitative and qualitative data. Often people just want to see the numbers. The numbers are really important and really great, but they hide a lot of nuance that you can only get from qualitative, from talking to people, from doing focus groups, from getting them to answer open-ended questions. You need that to really truly understand what the numbers are telling you. Otherwise, you may be misled.
Thank you so much for that. We do have a few questions, or a question from the audience to both of you. How can organizations effectively support and empower leaders to become impactful change makers within their respective fields or industries? Bree?
So effective change makers as inclusive leaders, perhaps, is how I'll take the question. Yeah. Firstly, we set them up for success so that we actually have, as part of our selection criteria, that we are looking for somebody who has a high level of inclusive leadership skills, and they would demonstrate that at interview. Why we're not doing that yet, I don't get it. So we make sure that we are recognizing that this is a skill that is learnt. It's not inherent. We can't just be a good person and all of a sudden we're an inclusive leader. we recognise it's a skill. We actually make sure that our leadership programs for our leaders include inclusive leadership, because mostly they don't. Sometimes they might have some element of a half-hour unconscious bias training, but that's not the skills that they require. And so we set them up in that way, and then of course we include it in our performance objectives as well. So that's kind of the structural things that we need to be doing. But then we do need to create space and time, whether it's in leadership programs or however it is, for leaders to be able to explore these topics, because most leaders haven't ever done that. And I do an activity at the start of one of my workshops where I ask leaders what's getting in the way. What's preventing you from being an inclusive leader? And 85% of the time, the response is fear. I'm afraid to get it wrong.
Yeah.
So I do nothing.
Which is worse, because you're doing nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we have to recognise
that
that's
everybody's
real,
on a different journey, right?
Yeah. And as you mentioned before, meeting people where they're at, we've got to meet them there and say, yeah, okay, it is fear. So how are we going to overcome that? What do you need to feel more confident in this space? And it's not unconscious bias training, it is inclusive leadership in its totality. What does this look like? Absolutely. How do we introduce interventions that will address problems? How do we identify the problems in the first place? So, yeah, that would be my answer. I don't know if you've got...
No, I don't have anything to add to that. No,
we are... that's all the time we have for today. So it's okay. I mean, you echo what Bree has stated, and really taken asking the right questions, doing the right things, communicating, working together. Sometimes things that are simple but aren't actually implemented in everyday or work life. So it's really great to know that sometimes it's not as overwhelming and scary as everybody thinks it is. And it can be just as simple as communicating with your organisation, asking the right questions, and recognising that we're all humans. We want to be valued, respected, supported, and bring our whole selves to work. And that's all there should be. Nice. Thank you so much for joining us on the final panel of today. I've really appreciated your insights on all the work you've done for the Women's STEM program, but diversity, equity, and inclusion as a whole. So thank you so much, Bree. Thank you so much, Isabelle. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we will be, moving on and almost finishing off this panel. So the panel is finished, and we'll be welcoming back Lisa Harvey-Smith for some closing remarks. Thank you so much. It was so great to meet both of you today and to chat with you. I appreciate your insights.
Excellent. Thank you.
So before we finish up this wonderful event today, we are going to open a quick poll question to get your feedback about the event. How valuable did you find today's event? What activity led by the Women in STEM ambassador and her team has been the most impact in your view? And one of the aims of today's event was to share actionable insights. Please briefly detail one or two specific actions or strategies you have taken away from today's session. We'd really appreciate your contribution to this evaluation, as it will really help us moving forward. Thank you very much.